today's World Insight. Hurdles to mass COVID vaccinations, from production and delivery bottlenecks to skepticism and concerns over new virus variants. How worried should we be? Insights from the Director General of the International Vaccine Institute.
The UN Secretary General said it best: no one will be safe until everyone's safe. So we really do need to work together to end this pandemic.
And Dr. Piot, who co-discovered the Ebola virus, shares his struggle with COVID-19 as the special advisor to the President of the European Council.
I really think we are entering the age of pandemics.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and this is World Insight. The world has now over 100 million confirmed COVID cases as virus mutations create new concerns. But we do have vaccines rolled out in some parts of the world. More than 50 million vaccine doses have been administered in over 50 countries and regions. With vaccines on hand and more on the way, how far are we from a COVID-free world? How much challenge, though, does the new mutation and variants pose to the vaccines we have today? On that, I talked to Jerome Kim, the Director General of the International Vaccine Institute. Let's listen in. In Seoul, we are joined by Jerome Kim, Director General of the International Vaccine Institute. Dr. Kim, what a pleasure.
Great to see you again.
Good to see you, sir. There have been enormous amount of info coming out regarding the efficacies of vaccines. What do you make of their efficacy these days, especially when there are enormous amount of uncertainties involving the variants and mutations?
Yeah, so we do know at least 6 vaccines have reported safety and efficacy data. Actually, an even larger number of vaccines have approval. I think it's really important to remember that, with many of these vaccines, we have at the most 2 to 3 months worth of reported data on efficacy, that is the prevention of COVID-19 disease, and safety. And for us to really begin to address this problem, we will hope, and there's every reason to expect, that these vaccines will be safe and efficacious for a longer period of time. We just, unfortunately, at this point, don't know how long.
Well, there have been some latest news regarding, for example, the Pfizer vaccine. The Pfizer CEO had been talking about recently that they are willing to make, shall we say, new shots, extra shots, if their vaccines are not necessarily effective in regards to the new variants and mutations. So what does that mean to you, sir? Do you think they will be able to do it well on time?
One of the advantages that Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna have is that their vaccines are based on RNA. And it's possible to make RNA vaccines with greater speed, typically, than the more standard kinds of vaccines. I think it's really important that they're willing to consider this because, although currently we believe that based on the data that have been published to date, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines should probably cover the mutants that were uncovered in South Africa and the UK. We know that new mutants will continue to occur, and we really want to make sure that the vaccines are safe and effective. So for those people who haven't been vaccinated yet, as your priority comes up and you are eligible to be vaccinated, you should take that vaccine. You should continue to practice social distancing, wearing masks, and avoiding crowds. Because as we bring the pandemic under better and better control, the rate of development of mutants should theoretically decrease.
South Africa, the UK, but what about the US and Brazil variants and mutations?
We're hoping that the vaccines, the immune responses, the infection-fighting proteins that are generated when a person is vaccinated will continue to cover the Brazilian and the new isolates that have been identified in the United States. But again, we have to actually see the data and the vaccine neutralization, the ability of the vaccine to generate infection-fighting proteins that bind to and inactivate the virus. Those are the kind of data that you don't want to just say, well, I think it should work, and then not prove it.
The booster shots, Dr. Kim, which the pharmaceutical companies have promised to deal with the new variants, when they give us the number or when they are saying this is effective, how should we know? Because it takes quite a while to do tests and trials for any of the vaccines that we're talking about that are efficient today. So how long will it take for trials and lab tests before they can tell us the booster shot will be efficacious for the latest variant?
So the issue here is actually something, what you're talking about is something we call a correlative protection. And what is a correlative protection? When you give the shots to people, you measure their blood to find out whether the shots are generating what we call antibody or immune responses, protective responses against the virus. What we'll do then, after we have evidence that a vaccine is protecting against infection, we can then go back and look at the blood of the people who were protected after vaccination and the blood of people who were vaccinated and became infected. And what we may then come up with, and it depends on how well we can look and what kinds of questions we can ask with the blood samples that we collect from patients after vaccination. We may be able to come up with 1 or 2 laboratory tests that will tell us, if you have this level of protective antibody, you should be protected. Once you have that, it's possible then to use that, what we call correlative protection, to speed up the development of new vaccines, to make the trials much smaller, to optimize the dose and the schedule, and to determine when we should boost people. So say we decide that neutralizing antibody, I'm using this as an example, neutralizing antibody is the correlative protection. And once we know the level of neutralizing antibody that's necessary to protect people, then we can plan when to boost someone based on how quickly the level of the neutralizing antibody goes down.
I see.
We can also then tell, the same way we do for influenza vaccine, when we need to develop new strains. And we can tell based on just the laboratory testing whether that vaccine should protect. So again, a lot will depend on the development of these correlates of protection. And all the companies that have announced results are actually looking right now to see if they can identify this correlate. And we're expecting that in February, probably by March, we may start to see early data, early scientific information about a correlative protection. But that's going to be really important because there's a long line of vaccines that are still in development. Right. Some of them may actually be better than the vaccines we have now. The best way to be able to test them and to test them quickly will be if we have this correlative protection.
Yeah. What is the quickly that you are talking about? Is there a time frame?
Yeah, so it does take a while, and the reason is that you have to isolate the virus, you have to sequence it, you have to move that sequence into additional kinds of tests, and then you have to actually get the blood from people who have received the vaccine and test it to see if it inactivates the new mutant strain.
Right.
But we have a real world example. So you know that every year the companies come out with a new influenza vaccine. Well, that vaccine is developed over the course of 6 to 9 months. So again, it's once you understand what the level of protective antibody should be, you can use the correlative protection theoretically to accelerate the development of new vaccines. So hopefully, again, the widespread vaccination of individuals and more rigorous following of the requirements for social distancing and masks and avoiding crowds will help us to control the virus itself, will reduce the number of mutations. That's one aspect. And then as the new mutations come out, we really need a worldwide system that is open, transparent, and shares information about the new mutants very quickly so that the companies can rapidly test their vaccines against these new mutants in a test tube. Actually showing protection, to actually go out and do another trial, a very large trial, involving 40,000 people will be very difficult right now, especially with safe and effective vaccines already being approved by a number of major organizations, the NMPA in China, the FDA in the United States, the European Union, EMA.
We see different examples. For example, in Israel, the number is really high now. Vaccination, almost 60% of the population. What does it say to all of us, how valuable a case study would Israel be for all of us?
Another great question. So one of the things that we don't have a lot of information on right now is what effect vaccines will have on communities, on cities, on countries. And Israel is the first case. They vaccinated a significant number of people, and they've already started to see significant decreases in the number of elderly who are hospitalized. That's the impact that we want to see. We want to see an impact on the number of people who have to go to the hospital, the number of people who have to be on ventilators, and the number of people who die. We need to have information about whether the vaccine is preventing spread. We know that vaccine prevents disease. So, the trials that we've done, the 200,000 people who are enrolled around the world in these phase 3 trials, they're answering one question: does the vaccine protect you, the vaccinated person, against COVID-19 disease? It doesn't tell us whether it's preventing COVID-19 infection, and it's not telling us that a person who's vaccinated will not transmit the virus to other people. So if you're vaccinated and you happen to be exposed, you may actually develop an infection that doesn't have any symptoms. And it's those people who can, again, spread the virus, which is why health authorities in China and elsewhere are saying, even after you've been vaccinated, you still have to wear a mask.
Some data to share with you. I'm sure you are already informed about that. 300 million, that's the US target for summer, something like this summer, according to the new administration. What does that say to the proactive herd immunity? Would those numbers be enough for proactive herd immunity?
So, unfortunately right now we have an estimate, a scientific best guess about the number of people, the percentage of people who need to be vaccinated in order to develop this herd protection. Initially, we thought it might be 60%, but you've noticed maybe recently people have been talking about 70%.
Yes.
Or 80%. Well, one of the key things here is that we don't really know. The studies that we have done to date really, again, are designed to look at protection of an individual. They're not designed to look at protection of communities. We need to do those studies to understand how effective these vaccines are in populations.
Right.
If we vaccinate 50% of a Chinese city or 50% of a city in the United States, will we see significant decreases in transmission to people who are not vaccinated? And that would be the true demonstration of herd protection. Those studies need to be done. And I think one of the things that the Chinese government and Chinese vaccine companies could do to help is to start the process of doing what we call effectiveness trials, helping us to understand the impact of vaccines on transmission, helping us to understand the impact of vaccines on transmission of mutant viruses. Because again, decreasing the number of infections may actually decrease the number of mutants. But do the Chinese, Sinopharm or Sinovac vaccines develop neutralizing antibody that protects against mutant strains? And again, I think people are waiting to hear from the companies to find out if this is the case.
In the United States, there were numbers. I do not know how reliable they are, and therefore I want to ask you. Some suggest that among the general population in the US, 10% of them have already developed antibody against the COVID-19. Now, I do not know whether it's accurate or not. Then they are saying with vaccination, for example, with 300 million by late summer, 40 to 50% of the population could develop some sort of immunity, rather. So will that be the way how we calculate the immunity possibilities within the population? How many other factors might be having a huge impact on the way that we are calculating like this?
When they talk about vaccinating 300 million people in the United States, that would be 90% of the population, roughly.
Right.
That is a level of vaccination that should, in theory, provide herd immunity. Now, it depends on the vaccine and the virus. So, for instance, with measles vaccine, we think that you need to vaccinate over 90% of the population in order to have some level of herd protection. And the reason is that the measles virus is much more transmissible. The vaccine is highly efficacious. The measles vaccine has a 95% efficacy. So again, it depends a little bit on the virus and a little bit on the vaccine. And to give you an example, for instance, IVI has developed a vaccine against cholera. Now, when the efficacy of that vaccine is only 55%, 55 to 60%. And so most people say, well, that's not very high. But if you vaccinate half of a city that has a lot of cholera, the impact on cholera in the city is 85%.
Right.
So you can see herd protection, and you can see protective effects on disease, even with vaccines that have efficacies in the 55 to 60% range. And even if you only vaccinate 50% of the population. So a lot will depend on what we find as vaccines are being rolled out, as we do these, what we call effectiveness trials, as we try to understand the impact of these vaccines on transmission.
So it's not simple math that we're talking about here. It's much more about the effect that is likely to create, it seems.
Yes, so it's not only about efficacy, it's really about effectiveness. I mean, when you're a country, I mean, it's important to protect individuals, but what you really need to know is when will you start to see a reduction in the number of people who get admitted to hospitals or intensive care units? I mean, people have seen both in Europe and in the United States that hospitals are filled up, that intensive care units are near capacity. You know, when will we start to see an impact of vaccination on those figures? Because that's actually really critical.
We have been also hearing data confusion, at least, from some other companies. For example, the vaccines developed by Oxford and AstraZeneca, there are different trials and different trials presenting different efficacy numbers, at least 2 or 3. So, Dr. Kim, there are only a few options when it comes to vaccines. How should the public approach the topic of vaccine and choose the right timing to have the vaccine, particularly given the fact that there are mutations and variants that could be still appearing in the near future, particularly at the winter time when we see the world is very much bogged down by COVID-19 already?
I think the best way to look at it is to look to the regulators. And you know, we don't like to necessarily do that, but these are the agencies around the world which are entrusted by their governments to make sure that vaccines that are used in the public are safe and efficacious. So in the US, it's the Food and Drug Administration. In China, it's the NMPA. For the European Union, it's the EMA. When they look at the data, they say, okay, the clinical trial was well done. The data show safety and show protection against COVID-19 disease at the following level, 95%. And when they give their approval, they're saying that we have reviewed the information. Sometimes they've repeated the analysis to confirm that the analysis is correct. They also stand by the quality of the vaccine. So, for instance, the US FDA or the EMA or the NMPA have done inspections on the manufacturing plants of these various companies. So again, the regulatory agencies are really important. The NMPA, the FDA, the EMA, the MHRA, which is the regulatory agency in Great Britain, are all WHO approved. With that approval, the company can then take the vaccine forward to the World Health Organization for emergency use listing, EUL. And emergency use listing allows that vaccine to be used in COVAX and to be purchased by UN agencies. So right now, Moderna and Pfizer have that approval. Other companies, including Chinese companies, I believe, are on the list awaiting review. So again, it's a very important mechanism because it says, not only does the national regulatory authority think that this vaccine is good enough, safe enough, efficacious enough, but then now the World Health Organization agrees. Really an important approval.
We see a new administration in the United States coming in. They have apparently a very different approach regarding COVID-19 prevention, control, vaccination as well. And also their approach to international organizations such as WHO and platforms such as COVAX. So, Dr. Kim, as someone who is an expert in the field, how do you see this change could mean for real international cooperation, which you and your colleagues have been calling on for almost a year now regarding COVID-19?
You know, around the pandemic, countries of the world really do need to be united of a single voice. And I think that there's actually even now very important modeling information that would suggest that the high-income countries, the wealthiest countries, will suffer up to $5 trillion worth of economic damage if they do not help developing countries, low and middle income countries, gain access to vaccination. If the United States joins COVAX, then the largest economies of this world, and it's going to be very important because, you know, the UN Secretary General said it best, you know, no one will be safe until everyone's safe.
Yeah.
So we really do need to work together to end this pandemic.
You're watching World Insight. Coming up in the program, Dr. Peter Piot, who co-discovered Ebola virus, told me about his personal fight against COVID-19 today as the special advisor to the President of the European Council. Stay tuned. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Widespread coronavirus infections in parts of the world have proven just how vulnerable people exposed to it are. Even those who dedicated their lives to studying viruses can fall victim to it. Dr. Peter Piot, the special advisor on COVID-19 to the European Commission president, contracted the coronavirus in March last year and suffered a long COVID for 5 months. He spent his whole career chasing viruses. He was with the team who first discovered Ebola, and he has led global efforts to fight HIV/AIDS for 2 decades. In an exclusive interview recently, Dr. Piot shares his thoughts on how we should prepare for future pandemics and his painful personal story of surviving COVID. Let's listen. I'm honored to be joined by Peter Piot, a special advisor on COVID-19 to the European Commission president, and also director of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, one of the giants of Ebola and AIDS research in the world. Peter, what a pleasure to see you once again.
Nice to see you again, Jan, after last year in Davos.
I know, I miss you and also Mrs. Piot. Let's jump in directly to the questions. What about vaccinations? Are they going to be sufficient, Peter?
Vaccinations are necessary but may not be sufficient. First of all, we need to make sure that the whole world is vaccinated. Because when it comes to a pandemic like COVID, it's not over until it's over everywhere. Otherwise, we will constantly have re-importation of cases into country. Take China, we've been very successful in bringing the epidemic under control, but it can start again anytime. So that's why vaccines are absolutely essential. And I think we are up to a good start. It's fantastic that the world could develop vaccines in less than a year. Chinese companies also, Western companies, Indian companies, just name it. And that's going to make a huge difference. And without the vaccine, we won't be able to make it. However, we will also need to continue to be careful and to be very vigilant to make sure that whenever there is a case, that we immediately act to prevent them to spread in the population.
Yeah. Peter, earlier you located and co-discovered the virus of Ebola. Have you ever imagined that we will be now challenged by an even bigger global pandemic like COVID-19?
Actually, for many years, I had a speech that was called, "Are we ready for the next pandemic?" Yeah. Because I was convinced, just like some other colleagues like Dr. Fauci or Bill Gates, yeah, that we will have another epidemic sometime. I always thought it would be more of an influenza type of the flu, like we had 100 years ago when the flu virus changes completely. So that was wrong. It was a coronavirus. And the answer to my speech was at the end was said, we are not ready, the world is not ready.
No.
And so I think we will see even more pandemics in the future. When and where they will come and which virus, nobody knows. But why are they always coming? Because they originate in animals, all of them. We don't know yet for sure for COVID-19 where it's coming from, but we know for SARS it's a bat, for Ebola it's also bats. For HIV with chimpanzee, we have in the Middle East with camels and so on. So it's unavoidable that now and then viruses jump from an animal onto humans, and then sometimes they cause an outbreak, an epidemic. That we cannot avoid. What we can avoid is to make sure that it remains local and that it doesn't become a big epidemic, as has been the case with COVID.
But Peter, over the past 2 decades, shall we say, we have noticed a trend, very worrying apparently, that the frequency of a global pandemic, whether it's larger or smaller scale in Ebola's case, for example, is becoming ever more intense. How shall we understand this?
Jen, you're absolutely right. I really think we are entering the age of pandemics. And why is that? On the one hand, as I mentioned, these viruses all come from animals in nature or also livestock. Take influenza, it's often birds, poultry, but it can also be pigs. So that is always there, but the world population is growing and growing in most places. So the pressure on animals and on nature is getting bigger. Yeah. Also, climate change makes it that we are destroying nature, and then that we are in more intense contact with animals that were living in the wild, and they could infect us. And then let's not forget that the world is far more mobile than before. What is a local outbreak in the past, today, overnight, someone can fly to the other side of the world and start an epidemic there. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's not bad, but that's the way that we are now living in this globalized world. And that's why we have to be far more vigilant, be better prepared, making sure we have early detection, that we have public health systems, so that we can act early, because acting early is absolutely the key. Hence the title of my book, my memoir, is No Time to Lose. No time to lose. When you see the beginning of an epidemic, you act.
There are so many aspects about the pandemic that we have a lot of thoughts about, but also a lot of questions that we don't know. In fact, it's a process of discovering the things that we don't know, for example, about the spread of the virus, the origins of the virus, the mutation of the virus, and also about vaccination, prevention and control, science and society, you name it, Peter. So many priorities we have to struggle with. It's mind-boggling. I'm sure for scientists, medical scientists like you, it's probably even more. Where shall we begin? Where should we focus our attention on as we move on? This is going to be mind-boggling years to come.
Indeed, I mean, managing uncertainty and the lack of knowledge of this virus has been a big handicap. And so we had to, in the beginning, to act a bit in the dark, but it was successful. And let's not forget, it's now about a year that we know that the virus exists, that it was first sequenced also in China, was shared with the world. And we've made enormous progress. I mean, we have vaccines. This is unheard of. Normally, it takes about 10 years to develop a vaccine. This time, in less than a year, we have vaccines that work and are safe. Both are very important. We've understood that how it's transmitted, but there are still many unanswered questions. For example, as you mentioned, viruses mutate. They change their genome, their constitution, if you want, to escape the immune response. That's how we fight against the viruses. Because what's the purpose in life of a virus? It's to survive, to find other people to infect. And we don't know yet what the meaning is of these mutations. There will be more and more, particularly coming from populations where there are lots of infections. We have now a British variant, a South African, a Brazilian, several American ones, and soon about every country will have it, where you have many infections.
Yes.
And the big question is, will these variants, these mutations, make the vaccines less effective? At the moment, it looks okay, but one day there may be a very nasty variant that escapes it. So we need to be prepared for that. So there's still a need for massive research. Also, on the treatment side, treating people with COVID, we've made less progress than I had hoped and less progress than on vaccines.
Yes, indeed.
So we need a lot of research continuing there. And the actual origin, if we ever will know, it's not yet clear. Why is that important? It's important to be prepared for the next epidemic and to be more vigilant. And when it comes to epidemics, we should not only think of us humans, people, but also of animals. We call that One Health, animals and people together, because it jumps over from animals. So we need to know what's going on in animals. And that's what's being done for influenza. For influenza, scientists follow infections in birds, mortality also in poultry, etc. So we need a system that is doing the same thing for coronaviruses.
Now, Peter, we know there was a dirty political fight earlier for the year 2020 about the origin of the virus. And, now WHO has been sending teams to different parts of the world, China included, for research about origins of the virus. To scientists like you, what do you think are some of the most important steps to know more about the virus origin? And would we ever be able to understand really where exactly started?
Well, based on the genome, the genetic signature or an identity of the virus, it probably is coming from some kind of bat. It's just like other coronaviruses causing SARS and so on. And it will be a matter of luck to find out where, and one day we probably will find. What happened exactly, I'm not sure we will ever find out. I'm looking forward to read the conclusions of the WHO, investigations, but they may not find a definite solution.
Yeah.
I'm mostly interested in knowing exactly how did it, how can we stop it?
I know you, sadly, was also contracted with COVID-19 earlier, but you survived, and now today, look at you, survived and thrived, still thriving.
Yes.
Wonderful news.
Yes.
But, tell me more about your personal stories, how you were struggling with this COVID-19. What does that mean to you as a scientist who understand better about really what's happening?
Yeah, after having fought viruses my whole life, and I'd never been seriously sick, I'm 71 now, and I was quite healthy. Last year in March, I suddenly became ill in the very early days, at least in Europe, of this epidemic, and developed serious, very splitting headache, fever, did not cough and so on, but I'm very tired. And I thought, okay, I got it. And indeed, my PCR test was positive, so I had the virus. But I thought, okay, I'm a healthy man. I run every morning 5 kilometers, and so, I have a healthy lifestyle. However, on the 1st of April, I had to be admitted to the hospital because my fever went worse. I could really hardly get out of bed, and I needed oxygen. And because I was very low on oxygen saturation. And it's oxygen that really saved my life. I was in the hospital for about 8 days. And yeah, but I developed also atrial fibrillation. So in other words, my heart was affected.
No.
And then afterwards, when I came back home and I thought, okay, it's fine, I survived. I developed like a chronic lung problem. I started having coughing and being short of breath, and that took about 5 months to fully resolve. I was particularly very tired, but now I'm fine. I'm really fully recovered, just that I need a bit more sleep than usual. I need 8-9 hours sleep a night, which is very new to me. I used to not need much sleep because I'm a workaholic. I work all the time. And but that's actually a good thing.
Yeah.
You need good sleep is good for your health.
I saw your photos of that time. You lost a lot of weight at that time. I'm sure you've been trying to recover with your utmost strength, and you're looking terrific.
Thank you very much.
Are you still jogging?
Yes, every morning. That's how I start.
Amazing.
Sometimes the weather is a bit too bad here, but but that took took a while. First, I could only do maybe a kilometer, so it was, but now my strength is back, and I need that because here we all work from home. I sit all day doing conference calls and stand, so we need movement, exercise to remain healthy.
I think I see a lot of vitalities and persistence in you. Peter, great job. Having said that, though, as a scientist, how do you see your own personal experience? What does it tell you about this virus, about COVID-19, and about this global pandemic, which is still continuing?
No, it changes your view on viruses. Up to now, I was an expert from outside and fighting them, but now I had the virus in me, inside.
But then from now on, please remain an expert from outside, okay?
Yes. But I had the experience. So I'm now in my mother tongue, my language, which is Dutch. I'm Flemish from Belgium, and so we call that an experience expert, not only a theoretical expert. And I felt a few lessons. One, that this virus is not just affecting the lungs or the respiratory, because it's respiratory transmitted. No, it affects every single part of your body. And that's something we didn't know in the beginning. Today we know. Secondly, it's not just that some people have very mild disease or nothing, symptomatic, and then others, particularly when you're older, you can die and you are in intensive care, but there's also something in between, and that there is this what we call now long COVID. So people who will suffer for many, many months from debilitating fatigue and heart problems, kidney problems, lung problems, brain having difficulty in thinking clearly. That's the second lesson, and now that's known, but in the beginning it was not known. Yeah. And thirdly, of course, this is about people. I came out in the media already in May, because I felt that all the government communication here in Europe was about statistics and not about people. And this is about people. When we had 100,000 deaths now in the UK, 100,000 people who died. I mean, that's 100,000 people who were alive, who have loved ones, family, and so on. And it's not just statistics. That's really important. But on the other hand, I'm more determined than ever to fight the virus and to make sure that as few people as possible get infected and die.
Peter, if you got an opportunity, I know you've been doing a lot of advice for both the European Council President and also providing your advice and suggestions to your colleagues, including Dr. Fauci, Mr. Gates, and many others. What do you think are the things that we really need to do now? Besides, words like cooperation, what do we need to do now to prepare for the fact that we would not be able to deal with COVID-19 within 1 year or two if you look at the rollout of the vaccine, but much longer term?
Well, first of all, I think rolling out vaccines, making sure there's enough manufactured and that everybody has access to it is a top priority. I hope, I should say, that we all have learned our lesson, that we cannot afford to be complacent and that we need to put in place the systems. It's like we all have fire brigades in case a house is in fire. And, you know, we don't set up the fire brigade when the house starts burning. No, we have to do it in between. And we all hope that the fire brigade will never have to work.
Dr. Peter Piot, the special advisor to the European Union President on COVID-19. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to search World Insight, the name of the program, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us, Twitter, Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching and stay safe wherever you are. Bye for now.